In this training, we're going to discuss formal assessments. WWP has done a lot to make this very streamlined for us, but audits say we're missing some things. Formals are not just paperwork, it's the documentation in WWP that we are missing on. This training will run through as if you would be requesting a formal assessment from the very first time a barrier is reported during the informal assessment. Keep in mind you can always update as needed whenever new information is available. Participant reports a barrier during the informal assessment. Be as detailed as possible in your notes. Remember, this screen is confidential, so explain away. You must add the barrier. This is one of the main areas we're getting dinged on with audits. Barrier type will automatically generate when adding the barrier through the informal. You will need to select the type from the drop-down if you enter the barrier through the Participant Barrier tab. Subtypes is a lengthy list generated based on the barrier type. You can select multiple subtypes. Onset month may have already been disclosed. If not, discuss and enter. Details. Any additional information. Most information should be on the barrier page previously. Details may include notes such as participant could not recall specific onset date, condition has worsened over time, things along those lines. It's tempting to click Add Contact, but don't. This is if more than one provider is working with participant for that particular condition. Click on the plus sign to enter contact information. Getting the contact information while you're running through the informal will make things easier for you as you go. Most likely, contact will be a treatment assessment provider, but could be something else. Use best available information. Enter in as much information as participant can provide. Plan to contact the provider's office to confirm. If the appointment is in office, check ROI signed and enter the date. If using DocuSign, wait until signed and received. Don't forget to go back in and update. In details, I like to add what kind of provider, primary, psychiatrist, pain management, etc., and also who the provider is affiliated with. Not necessary, but may be helpful. The only required information is contact title and name. You can save without anything else. You can always go back in and enter more information later. You are not limited to sending a formal assessment to just one provider. Start with who do they meet with most often for the reported condition. You can add contacts and request more information from there. Save will take you back to the barrier details page. Scroll down and enter the referral date. This is the date the formal assessment was discussed, assigned, requested, whatever term you want to use to describe that conversation. To place as a W2T, participant needs to have an appointment to complete the assessment scheduled with their provider within 30 days of the placement date. Remember, this training is running through as if it's a perfect world. If they do not have an appointment within the next 30 days, best practice is to wait until they do have an appointment to place as W2T. There is a status we'll discuss later to help explain placement rationale. Assessment date is to be entered when the completed assessment has been received. Move on from that for now. They may choose to decline the referral, place as a CSJ. We will want to have it documented that barriers were reported. You would not need to enter any contact information if the referral is declined. If declining the formal assessment agreement should still be signed and I decline to complete marked. Barrier type, onset month, and referral date are the only required fields on the barrier details page. As we saw, there is a lot of other information that can be added. It is best practice to gather as much information as you can while you have the participant with you. You will receive a warning if you're missing one of those three pieces. You want to have as much in here to make life further on down the line easier when you are ready to send the formal assessment to the provider. Once everything is entered, save and exit. Save and exit will take you back to the participant barrier screen in the informal assessment, and the barrier will now appear. Success! Check that audit box. Continue on with the rest of the informal assessment, but you're not quite done yet. The barrier is added. Now what? Navigate to the Participation Statuses screen through the Case Management tab. For those of us who worked in mainframe, this used to be a component and there was mass chaos in active versus scheduled dates. Now we have statuses, and it will be so much easier once it becomes part of your process. Click on Add the Status. Today we're focusing on formal assessments, but if you're in here, you can add if they're working towards Social Security as well. You can add other participation statuses after entering the formal assessment pending. You have to enter the statuses separately because it's different sets of information, but great time to discuss with your participant where they are at if working with Social Security. For today's training, enter FA, formal assessment pending. Begin date is the date the formal assessment is discussed. End date will be entered after the completed formal assessment has been received. For now, we're marking as current. Details. These should be notes about upcoming provider appointment. You will need this for the EP if one is scheduled. Here, you can state the next appointment date, participant does not have an upcoming appointment, or is not working with a provider yet. Per policy, they have 30 days from being placed as a W-2T to have the provider appointment to complete the formal assessment. If no upcoming appointment, wait to place as a W-2T until appointment is scheduled. Requesting the formal does not automatically equal W-2T placement. We're just looking for more information to help make the best decision. The formal assessment pending participation status will keep activities from being sanctioned while in open status. Without knowing when that appointment will take place, it is best practice not to place as a W-2T. Place as a CSJ with open formal assessment pending status so they do not get sanctioned while they work on getting the formal completed. This step was hardest for me to wrap my brain around, but think of it this way. A participant comes in and reports a barrier and reports this barrier impacts her daily living and ability to work, but she does not meet with a provider regularly. How can we best meet her needs when she is not working to improve her situation? Place as a CSJ until the participant has an appointment with provider. This way we are in compliance with W-2 policy. Note the 30th, 60th, and 90th day from this status beginning as a reminder to yourself that action needs to be taken. If it is and we get a valid formal assessment back, then great. If not, our attempts to assist the participant have been documented. Close out the status and inform participant that if activities are not completed, their check will be sanctioned moving forward. We are not medical professionals. We need the information to make the best informed decision on a case. Save will take you back to the Participation Statuses page. This is where you can add the status for Social Security if necessary. Next step, scheduling your next EP review appointment and completing the EP. If your participant cannot tell you when their next appointment with their provider is, they may need to be reminded that this must be reported. The notes section is a great place to do so. It may not always be feasible to get an appointment scheduled within 30 days with a provider, but participant needs to show they're working on it. At the next appointment with TDS, they need to be prepared to report when they have scheduled this appointment for, if one is not already scheduled. If you place as a W-2T, but an appointment is not scheduled in the next 30 days, pinned comments must state why. Moving on with the EP, on the left-hand side, the status will appear under the EP menu. Participants cannot see this. It will not print on their EP. This is the reminder to you that this is going on. Be aware of this reminder because the open FA status will keep activities from being sanctioned. It will go away when the status is ended. If they have an upcoming appointment, get it on their EP. Even if it's a little more than 30 days out, go ahead and put it on there. If they only meet with a provider once every 6 months and we're looking at several months before next appointment, they will need to schedule an appointment sooner, specifically to go over the formal assessment. Activity, what kind of assessment needs to be completed? Description, upcoming appointment to complete formal assessment. Location, provider's office. Start date is the date of the provider appointment. It is not recurring. 1 hour is fine. You can put a time on there. It's not required. Just be aware that if you put a start time, it needs to have an end time. Reminder, this will be on their EP, so having that information on there may be a reminder to them that they need to discuss the formal assessment at that upcoming appointment. We can have everything in place, but if participant and or provider forget about the assessment, then we will have problems. Activity is added, complete the rest of the EP. The EP is done, participant has gone on their way, now starts the legwork. Going back to the information entered during the informal assessment, do you have all the necessary contact information for the provider? Whether or not you do, you need to call the provider's office to obtain or confirm information, especially the fax number. We need to do this in order to be in compliance with HIPAA regulations. Necessary documentation. Formal assessment agreement must be signed. They have to agree to have the assessment done. Remember, if they decline, we still need it documented that they are declining. The ROI, request of information. If using the EQUIS medical examination and capacity form, the ROI is included. Just make sure you enter their name on the tiny line. If you're using one of the state forms, you need to have the authorization for disclosure of confidential information. We call it the ROI. If you choose to use the state forms, you will need to send the proper form to the provider, either the medical examination and capacity form geared towards physical barriers or the mental health report geared towards mental barriers. Getting the formal assessment to the provider. Faxing to the provider is the best plan. After attempting to fax, if you have not gotten the completed assessment back, you can send the document with the participant with strict instructions it must be faxed back. To avoid fraud, the completed assessment should not be accepted if turned in by the participant. A completed assessment should be returned to the agency by the provider only, most likely by fax. Some providers may have email depending on the kind of provider. What should be sent to the provider? Fax cover sheet if faxing. Letter of explanation. We have found that it is best to provide a letter of explanation with the formal assessment. Don't worry, we have something for you. This letter explains to the provider what this information is for. If using the state forms, the separate ROI, and then the formal assessment that needs to be completed. The last step at this stage is pin comments. Templates are located in 365 pin comment templates and formal assessment desk aid. In the example on your screen, the yellow is what needs to be customized to each participant and what they have going on. Reminder, this example is a perfect world scenario where participant was placed as a W2T. What kind of barrier? Not diagnosis, just physical or mental barrier. Documents were sent through DocuSign or signed if met in person. Will the assessment be faxed or sent with participant? Do they have an upcoming appointment? What is the 30th day from being placed as a W2T? Was supportive services accepted? Not part of the training, but it's part of the template. And then we wait to receive the completed formal assessment. What do you do once the valid, completed formal assessment is received? Send to QA, your lead, and ECF. Double check that you have an appointment within 30 days of receiving the completed formal assessment. W2 policy requires this. Before this appointment, do your research. Read over and understand the formal assessment. Staff with your supervisor or lead if you have questions. Call the doctor's office if there are questions. Visit askjan.org. Check the manual. Be prepared for this next appointment. What can we help with to make this participant successful? At the appointment, navigate to the Participant Barriers page. Any barriers entered previously will be there. You're going to edit, not delete, the barrier using available information from the formal assessment. You will need to scroll down slightly under Formal Assessment to Assessment Date. This is the date the provider signed the assessment. Assessment not completed would be if after 90 days of multiple attempts to get a completed formal assessment back, we do not get one. In the details, as well as pin comments, you would need to state why the assessment was not completed. The case would need to be staffed with a supervisor before the 90-day mark to discuss placement change due to lack of verification for W-2T placement. Entering an assessment date will expand the screen to include valuable required information. How long will the symptoms likely last will expand out. Make your selection. Recommended reassessment date should be in the formal assessment. If no date, enter a date 1 year out. You must also select a contact or provider. Clicking on the magnifying glass will bring up the providers entered on the case. You will need to select the provider who completed the formal assessment. If there are multiple providers, you can search or sort to locate. Oh no, you clicked on the wrong provider. It's okay, just be aware. The pencil will edit contact information. The trash can will delete the contact from the system. The eraser will erase the contact as who completed the formal assessment and allow you to go back in and select a new one. One last piece of information that can be entered here, hours the individual can participate, is not required. This information may be on the formal assessment, so if it is, include it, but a formal assessment is not required to regulate the number of hours. With accommodations, your participant may just be able to complete 30 to 40 hours per week. A little bit further on down, accommodations, an answer is required. If accommodations are recommended on the formal assessment, select yes, and the screen will again expand to update. We would highly recommend looking into this before the appointment takes place. What does the provider recommend on the formal assessment? What is the barrier? What can we reasonably offer? Reasonable accommodations are listed in the manual, section 1.3.3. Several options to prepare were addressed 2 slides ago. Reasonable accommodations from the manual match up with the expanded screen that appears when you click Accommodations for. Details are required if accommodations are needed. The who, what, and possibly where. Why is already listed under Accommodations for. When can be listed, not required. It may take some time to get the accommodations into place. And finally, save. And now the participant barrier screen is updated. The end is in sight. Again, we will navigate to the Participation Statuses page. Click on the Editing tool. Deselect Current. The end date is the date of the EP review appointment. Remember, the pending formal assessment participation status is that holder that keeps activities from being sanctioned while awaiting the assessment, Manual 6.4.1. That's why the end date is when the EP is updated and/or accommodations discussed. You will need to update details to what is current on the case. Save. The status will still appear, but you can now see that it is end dated. The details will still appear, which is why they should be updated. Guess what? There's more. No. You did it. Following these instructions, you will have successfully entered participation barrier, participation status, requested the formal assessment, and updated once formal assessment has been received, and with that, checked all those boxes for our audits. But most importantly, this will help you to best meet the needs of your participant. Just don't get so excited you forget to update the EP after you have discussed the formal assessment and accommodations. This training was all about the formal assessment itself. We have a flowchart that will be part of your desk aid packet that will walk you through when to assign the formal assessment pending participation status, when to put the formal assessment on the EP, and what placement is best for W-2 policy. In summary, when a barrier is reported, add the barrier, then participation status, and if upcoming provider appointment is scheduled, add appointment as an activity on EP. Be aware of 30, 60, 90-day timeframes. The manual states a formal assessment must be scheduled within 30 days of being placed as a W-2T. Extenuating circumstances may apply. A barrier does not have to mean W-2T. Accommodations may be all that is necessary for success.